are going through. I think what happens on op then is that you have an overarching image of this generic God that is propagated by the church or other religious organizations, and
Point of
you don't
clarification.
necessarily, I'll take it later. And okay, and basically this image of God is somebody that like is there. They see the world, but they don't necessarily connect with you. So first on this concept of
Point of clarification.
yes, okay, I'll take it.
On your side, is God seen as more like subjective in like the literature and like the Bible? Like it can be accommodating to different people's needs?
Yes, I think so. Okay. Next, on how we help religious organizations expand. I think that when we have a narrative that people can have their own personal relationship with God, they can interpret it in their own way, it helps people become more engaged. Specifically, we think this targets A, people that are not religious and want to get into it, or two, people that are not devoted. For example, like they're born into a family that is religious, so they go to church because their parents do, but they don't necessarily feel personally connected. I think that this like narrative helps people believe that there is something uniquely in it for them, in the sense that God specifically can help them and helps them have a more meaningful connection rather than just worshiping a God because generally like he's a good person or he's done good towards the world. I think it also helps because people can have their own religious interpretations. This means that it becomes more inclusive for people that may interpret things differently, and they don't feel forced to conform to whatever like religious organization they go to and whatever they say is correct. We think that lastly, it can also help in terms of discussion where people can talk about their interpretations more. I think this helps people feel further connected. So what is the impact of this? We think that evidently people are more engaged in religious organizations, which is good for the organizations, but we think that they're also good for society because a lot of religious organizations are involved in things like volunteer work, and in this case they spend a lot of time, for example, helping the poor. And we think that this is able to, through this, if religious organizations are able to grow, we're able to impact people that are not involved in like the religion, but are vulnerable communities in society as a whole. Then on our second point, on how we're able to motivate and encourage people, specifically when they have a lot of challenges within their society. So we think that everybody is going to face challenges, but there's a difference in the way people interpret, religious people will interpret it on both sides of the house. We think on Gov, it's like even if you are suffering from a challenge, people are more likely to like come up with a personal reason as to why they think they're undergoing this challenge. Whereas like on ops side, it's more likely that they just say, well, God just wants like the whole world to suffer because he thinks that we've done something bad or something along those lines. But we think that the more important difference here is that people feel supported as an individual. This means that they think that God understands what their feelings are, what their specific worries are, and they're able to give them specifically strength and encouragement. I know that strength and encouragement itself doesn't solve a problem, but I think it motivates people that are struggling to understand that they are supported and there is somebody who thinks that they can succeed and like overcome all of the challenges. I think this motivates them to take action in terms of combating whatever challenge they're facing because they think that because they're motivated to do so and they think that like it is something that is doable because of the support they receive from God. So what have I proven to you today? I've talked about why religious organizations are able to benefit, which further benefits all religions like that are vulnerable within society, and we also prove why we're able to help religious people that are undergoing difficulty, and on that basis we are proud to propose.
Cool. I think that speaker for a fine speech, and we'll call the leader opposition to begin the case for OO. Here.
Okay, I need 1 second for my timer, and I prefer verbal POIs. Sorry, okay. There's something I want to clarify about the motion at the top of my speech, which is to say that it's about religious organizations emphasizing the legitimacy of people's personal relationships with God. So on our side, there's more likely a balance of personal interpretations along with collective interpretations, but what they're defending on their side is heavily bolstering one of those things to the point where one of them probably overtakes the other and becomes a more dominant narrative. So on our side, people can still have personal interpretations. They may still be encouraged in some format, but they're not especially encouraged to the point where we'd say one overtakes the other. That is the crucial difference, and that is why a lot of OG's points probably don't actually apply to the extent they think they do. I'll be doing two things in this speech then. First, talking about some refutation, and then two of my own points. My first point will be on why an overly individualized belief system can be especially harmful, and secondly, why this emphasizes the role of community and religion being collective interpretations and why that's actually really beneficial for society. First, refutation then. I think I already pointed out in my introduction that in the status quo, there's a balance and we'd say that's better, and we still have some of their benefits of those personal interpretations, but I'd also add that their case is very abstract on the whole. It's very unclear how many people actually will think in these ways, how many people will be motivated, or how many people will find these personal interpretations to be of use. So you can clearly identify the scope of their points, and to that extent, I'd say it's not very impactful. But also, there are many different religious schools. Some are more liberalized, some have higher pressure, but most of these religious schools, because of like social movements, have now been liberalizing to accommodate more flexible religious opinions, which makes it more likely that their impacts aren't that important in the whole context of religion changing as our modern values adapt. Okay. My first point then on why an individualized belief system can be especially harmful. The first thing I'd say is that it's like when there are personal interpretations, those are emphasized on their side. So if there are harms that come with personal interpretations, then those grow to a much larger extent on their side and to a point where they might meet a threshold to become harmful. So there are three ways we think personal interpretations are harmful then. Firstly, when you have every single person, not every single person, but a large majority of people having their own personal interpretations, you bolster existing biases. You have internal confirmation bias telling you you're right, but if you're told that all of your relationship with God should purely be personal, then now you believe all of your existing biases, being whether you're racist, you're homophobic, you're somebody who is just xenophobic and hates foreigners on the whole. All of those internal biases are now have an echo chamber to grow and acclimate and become very, very present in terms of what you believe about the world, because you don't have the accountability and checks and balances of a community telling you that goes way too far. These personal iterations of religion can probably be the most harmful and have the cases where you actually have violent disputes or violent behavior happening because people don't have checks and balances holding them back, because at least most churches or all churches advocate against violence, and they advocate against people having like violent expressions of their beliefs. But secondly, it's easier for people to just leave religion, even if it's a good thing for them, and even if it's helping them like gain community and learn more about the world, because there's less consistency available. You can just read a Bible whenever you want to, so maybe you forget about it and you never return to religion, and that's especially harmful because you aren't able to derive any benefits or any social or just personal growth benefits from the fact there's no consistency and nothing to refer back to. But also, thirdly, religion has now a much higher barrier to get into, because you have to already have some level of understanding with religion or understanding of how religion functions, because otherwise you receive a pamphlet from somebody on the street and you're supposed to use that to have this like overarching understanding of an omnipresent being. On our side, when it's a more collective interpretation, there are churches that can key you in, they can teach you about their religion, they can teach you about their community and their culture and their values, and in that process, you're more likely to actually stay in the religion and derive benefits from being there and from attending church meetings over and over. And why is our side comparatively better off? The existence of communities balances out particularly egregious instances like we talked about before, but also just the fact that its consistency referred to makes religion more successful in delivering the positive impacts and not just negative ones. I'll take a POI from closing.
A woman from a religious minority facing struggles because of the religion cannot get out when God is so vague and general on your side. And the religion itself...
I have a response to this right here. For people who do not fit into particular communities, as we mentioned before, personal interpretations still exist, but their legitimacy is not emphasized, but we can still say they are legitimate. We just don't emphasize that this is especially important. Second point on the role of community in religion then. Here's why devaluing community is so bad. Firstly, community ties are so crucial to how people understand religion and derive benefits, and that the value of religion is not just a book or an abstract faith, it's also the people you meet, the friends you make, the people you grew up with, your literal family who are part of that religion, and it allows you to connect across borders, across nationalities, and across identities. So when you don't go to regular church meetings, and when you aren't able to recognize other faith believers as having this collective thing you all believe in, and you don't see them as also fellow like churchgoers who you just have a love for because they also believe in religion, then you lose out on all those positive benefits benefits that are practically associated. But secondly, religious organizations will lose funding if nobody ever goes to church, which is harmful because they do a lot of charity work and filling for a lot of places where governments miss. For example, the YMCA or even the YWCA have been great for helping a lot of minority children and disenfranchised children gain access to schooling and education and having like an active lifestyle. Those things disappear on their side, which is why they're actively harmful. We're proud to oppose.
Cool. I think that's speaker for a fine speech. And welcome the DPM to continue the case for OG. Here.
Okay, 1 second. Okay, once again, verbal POIs, please. And my timer begins in 3, 2, 1. Speaker, I think there has been a few problems with OO so far, and that lies in them saying that religions are becoming more liberalizing. There are echo chambers of biases and stereotypes. It's mostly what it revolves around, right? Okay, a few things I'll be doing for you today then. Let's just refute OO as like a summary, and then going on to 2 clashes. Firstly, on in which world is religion more meaningful to the most number of people? And note here that this directly clashes with OO's point on how, like, you know, there's a higher barrier to entering religion on our side of the house. And secondly, on which side produces a happier society in general. First of all, let's talk about OO, right? They tell you that, you know, our side creates like echo chambers of like biases and stereotypes. In fact, we think that this is actually lessened on our side. Why is this? Because the overall word of God throughout many religions have their own inherent biases. And it, like, for example, like there are religions out there who can be considered like homophobic or sexist and etc. So on their side, on our side, at least more views are accepted, and people are not told that, you know, you're not a true follower of this religion because you don't accept this relationship with God or this like word of God. But, no, thank you. But also, if someone has these kinds of extreme biases like inherently, then it doesn't really matter in the scope of this motion because they can just find these echo chambers outside of their religion. And most of the times these biases arise not because of, like, you know, people aren't just born with these biases. They're probably surrounded people with these biases anyways, and therefore they're still going to find that sort of like echo chamber like surrounding them, right? Okay, but then let's go on to like the first clash on how like this like makes people like how this actually makes people's religious affiliation more meaningful. Anna basically tells you a few key pieces of characterization, right? And it's that a lot of people become religious not because of some like personal connection to God or because they're willingly making that choice to do or through some like deep reflection or etc. In fact, a lot of people just become religious because they're born into a religious family, and when you ask them why are you religious, they can't really give you an answer because they're just going to say like, oh, you know, I'm Christian because my parents are Christian. However, what this motion changes and encourages people to do is then to have people actually reflect more on why they individually are part of the religion, or at least more than the status quo. So that just makes that kind of like positive difference, right? But like, and in terms of like what is God offering them specifically and how that is good for them, this then leads to impacts. One, this is more personal and unique and overall makes the time spent by this religious follower more meaningful. And two, instead of having people be dragged to church because they're just told to them that they have to go to church because, you know, they're part of this religion, they actually go there because they want to like go there and like be like in the, I don't know, vicinity of God because because of some personal connection with God. But also, very importantly, we like to talk about the benefits this brings to religious organizations, right? It's unclear to me why this barrier to entering is actually higher on our side, because on our side, at least we're accepting that that different people can have different interpretations of of God, and they can have their own personal interpretations. And therefore, on ops world, people who are not part of a religion may not feel that they are accepted because their view simply differs from what like the religious organizations tells their followers to view God as. However, on our side, more people are actually able to have their different interpretation accepted, meaning that they're more likely to feel accepted in this religion and thus join. This obviously leads to positive benefits because the more like followers a religion has, like the more capacity they're able to do good work for the society. I think we agree on that impact. Secondly, on which side actually produces a happier society in general, right? Okay, the thing here is that like motivation and encouragement, and the characterization here is that A, people feel better when their support is more targeted towards them and individually, and B, people generally feel better when they are the only person or a person that is being targeted by this help, right? The comparative then is that on Ops World, people are told that yeah, sure, like God loves all his creatures, and like you're in this world and suffering for X reason or whatever, right? The thing is here, however, while God being there for everyone is beneficial to some degree, it is more beneficial on our side. We're able to reap more benefits because, for example, the common reasoning for suffering is that, like, I guess God is testing you and wants you to be stronger or whatever. But on our side, more views such as I'm suffering now because God has planned something better for my future, or I deserve this because I've committed a grave sin, or like God wants to show his strength through my suffering. All of these can be like interpreted as valid reasoning for why someone is suffering or going through a hard time. I think that overall on our side, we make religion much like more accepting and much open to the general public, but also most importantly protected. But most importantly, it just makes people like actually spend more meaningful time like indulging in their religion. So proud to propose.
Cool. I think that's speaker for a fine speech. Please remember to time other people when they're speaking so you don't interrupt them during their protected time. And with that said, I welcome the DLO to continue the case for OO here.
Okay. Sorry, just give me one sec. I'll take verbal POIs. Time starts on my first word. Sorry, I'm just pulling up a timer. Okay. I'm going to clarify again at the top of my speech that government's burden in this debate was to prove why individual interpretations were significantly better than religious communities in the vast majority of situations. And because they couldn't do that and they didn't engage with Jessica's framing about how in the status quo there are both sides of it that exist. So that is to say that there are individual interpretations, but there are also religious communities that are equally accepted. Then on our side of the house, you're able to both co-opt government's impacts, but also get a bunch of exclusive impacts that come at the benefit of having religious communities and having both interpretations of religion coexist. On our side of the house, we are incredibly proud to oppose. I'll just go through some just regular refutation and rebuilding. First, on the gov argument that you get marginalized communities, so for example, like queer people or women who got an abortion, to find their own individual interpretation without getting shamed. Note that we're not contesting that individual interpretations can be useful when it comes to religion. But there are two crucial notes here. First, many people from marginalized backgrounds that are religious already do have individual interpretations of their relationship with God in the status quo and on our side of the house, because if they genuinely believe that they can't fit in within their religion or under any extenuating circumstances, there's no reason why they already wouldn't do this in the status quo. And note that OG themselves don't give any reasons why this isn't possible in the status quo, and that's because it does happen. So people who have grown up with or around religion and it has been a heavy part of their life probably want to keep religion in their lives anyways, so they try to adapt it. But also because most religious people are practically indoctrinated with religion from the second they're born, it's incredibly hard biologically speaking for them to just ditch their religion. So at the end of this, if you're a queer teen growing up in the most conservative church group imaginable, you probably already have an internalized relationship with God anyways, because you want to find ways to make peace with your own faith while not feeling horrible about your identity. So that already does happen in the status quo.
Right.
But the second key note here is that OG hasn't proven why communal religion is particularly harmful. And that's because communities have a unique capacity to deliver emotional support from real people that face the same struggles that you do. And oftentimes, and I want to note that this directly flips the OG claim and the CGPOI about people who don't fit in, many marginalized communities within religion are already collectivizing. So you have, for example, queer subsects of Christianity, you have different minority groups for people of color, etc. But note uniquely that there is a current liberalizing trend of religion in the status quo. So we don't necessarily need personal interpretations exclusively to solve all those problems because of other societal norms that are already influencing this and creating these subsects for marginalized communities that give people a safe space to just like explore their faith. And here I want to bring back Jessica's argumentation about why communities are uniquely beneficial in general when it comes to religion. Because you just create support groups for individuals. You create groups for people who are going through the same thing. And biologically and scientifically speaking, there is massive emotional benefit to having other people that are literally there for you because you can feel heard, you can feel accepted, and you can feel supported. And no matter how much an individual relationship with God can be fulfilling on their side of the house, at the end of the day, it's just you with your own thoughts. And oftentimes, note, and this is very crucial here, people are significantly harsher on themselves than they are with other people. So when you mess up and you only have an individual relationship with God, you are incredibly mean to yourself. You put yourself down because you internalize all the blame because you have nowhere else to get it out. You don't have other people that can tell you that it's not your fault and you were doing the right thing. Whereas on our side of the house, you can have that individual interpretation, but you also have communal relationships that balance this thing out. So for example, in those situations where you feel like you messed up and you can talk about this in a safe space with other people who acknowledge your struggles, then you feel less bad about yourself. You're less likely to do things like resort to horrible coping mechanisms or really devalue your own self-worth. So on our side of the house, you have much more fulfilling relationships with yourself in general, in addition to religion. But also note here, and this was unengaged with by proposition, that there are many harmful opinions that exist in the status quo right now. So even though that there is a liberalizing trend in the status quo, there are still people who hold incredibly conservative views when it comes to Christianity. And note crucially, on their side of the house, when they only have these individual internalized relationships, it's very easy for them to create echo chambers, and that just reinforces their own conservative beliefs that harm other people. Note crucially that when you're in a group setting, in a communal setting, it's much harder to voice conservative opinions about how you believe that some people are inferior or how some people are sinners when they haven't done anything wrong than it is to just think that to yourself and then believe that you are right. So on our side of the house, you're actually able to disempower these religions significantly more. But in addition to that, the other societal benefit we get is I think that you actually get decreased polarization, because when you create subsects and denominations of religions that are significantly more liberal and you have collectivized action from these groups, you can actually start to rework some of the archaic beliefs that religion is incredibly conservative. You actually reduce a lot of the tensions between the left and religious organizations. But also furthermore note that when you disempower religious organizations, you also take down all of the good things that they've already done and all of the good things they can do in the future, like raise things for charities, etc. On that basis, incredibly proud to oppose.
Cool, I think that's speaker for a fine speech, and welcome the member now to begin the case for CG. You're here.
Let's have 10 seconds to organize my notes. Just confirming once again that I'm clearly audible.
Yes, you are.
panel when a woman in Saudi Arabia literally feels worthless due to harmful representations of Islam, telling her that she can't even walk on the streets without being accompanied by a man. That's when religion becomes absolutely useless. It had a powerful position in society, but that place is not being used properly. Extremely proud to boast. 3 things I'm going to do in this speech. First, on 2 extensions. 1, on less misrepresentation of religion. 2, on lesser discrimination against disenfranchised communities on our side. Second, I'll just take out OG from this round and be against them. Third, taking out OO from this round, right? Firstly, on extensions, I think the first extension is on less discrimination, on less misrepresentation of religion on our side. What happens to opposition, right? I think religious beliefs are just necessarily collective or opposite side of the house. What does this mean? This means 2 things. 1, bad actors within religion with radical beliefs get followers who are gullible because the followers think that this thing is correct. They should be believing these people in the first place, which means that these followers who are gullible are likely to buy into radical representations of religions, which is necessarily bad. But 2, bad actors within institutions or people or like priests or things like that can misrepresent religion to their own benefit and make people actually do bad actions within the first place because people think that because gullible people think that religion is something that's collective, that you have to buy into things that others feel that, and that the representation of religion and what religion actually means is the same for everybody. Why it is harmful? I think there are just tangible harms of radicalism. This looks like suicide bombers in Pakistan. This looks like terrorists in Iraq. There are just tangible effects of radicalism which are necessarily harmful. How do we solve this? I think that when beliefs are individual on our side, you're less affected by other people's beliefs. You're less likely to buy into their beliefs in the first place, at the point at which you think that religion is something that's on a personal level, right? Which means you're less likely to buy into radical ideas that others give you in the first place, which means you understand that these ideas are harmful and you're not so blinded by religion, you're not so blinded by the collectivization of religion that you buy into these ideas without any thought. Second, it's important to note that the average man is good when he's left alone, right? This is why pragmatic institutions exist and you want to uplift other people. This is why you have positive interactions in society, right? What does this mean? This means that at the point at which you're left alone, you're much more likely to make good choices in the first place. And at the point at which you're left alone, the majority of people within religion are likely to make good choices and not radical and extreme ones. The impact of this is that society is much better off on our side. Second extension on less discrimination. I think the problem that exists in opposition is that there are certain communities that are sidelined due to the harmful representations by religious orthodoxy. What does this mean? This means 2 things. 1, this means communities like women being sidelined and disenfranchised by harmful representations of Islam. It means that people from the lower class being sidelined by representations of Christianity and Hinduism, right? It just generally is extremely harmful to these sorts of communities. What happens then? This means that this is not something that's in the Quran or the Bible. It's something that religious orthodoxy represents in the first place, right? What is this into a harmful self-perception of people from these communities in 2 ways. 1, the mental health of these people is much worse in general, at the point at which you think you're worthless. But 2, you accept bad things that are done to you because you think that I deserve this anyways. I'm anyways worthless. The solution of this is twofold on our side. 1, you have the comfort. You think God is with you, whatever struggles you might face in life, even if you're struggling as a religious mind, as a person from lower class, God is always with you during those struggles. But 2, you do not care about what the orthodoxy thinks, to the point at which religion is personal. The impacts of this is we just have a much better self-perception on us. I know this directly responds to their entire claim that came from opening opposition on discrimination. Taking OG around quickly, right? 2 things they gave us. 1, how people are more engaged with religion and how it motivates people to take certain actions. I think comfort is provided on either side of the house. It's important to note who receive the comfort on OG. The people who receive the comfort are the majority. They're anyways well off. Their life is anyways far easier. On CG, we tell you the most vulnerable receive this sort of comfort because they are A, systematically oppressed, B, historically disenfranchised, C, they cannot access their rights. These are the people we give comfort in the first place. We got this niche claim from them also on volunteer work. I think this is far-fetched, right? The likelihood of us accessing benefits is just much greater because I'm unsure as to why more people buy into religion on their side, which is not fully mechanized, and also why everybody who buys into religion starts volunteering. Quickly on O, right? First, they notice on the balance of both. I think the counterfactual. This is unlikely when you know you don't need to rely on others and don't need to go to the church every Sunday. Why would you just form a collective identity. Second idea, we got something about individual beliefs are bad. They got on both the biases. One, I told you how this is unlikely. You need unity while being racist or sexist, which you don't have on their side. But two, our extension is just more likely. The struggle is solved on our side. Also, they told us about this higher barrier. I think it's good if you understand religion more, you're less likely to rely on the picture of harmful representations of religion. For all reasons mentioned in my speech, extremely proud of this.
Cool. I think that's speaking for a fine speech, and we'll hold the member off to begin the case for CO. Here.
Yeah, can you guys hear me? Hello?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay. Give me a quick second. I'm just gonna grab a drink of water. Okay, my timer is like broken. Trying to set it up. Also, yeah, before I begin, Angela, can you hear me? Yeah, try to like listen to my speech very carefully because it's gonna like be sort of confusing. But okay.
No worries.
All right. First, I'll wash out opening half from this debate, and then I'll go into my unique extension on why religious integrity in itself is extremely important on holding virtue ethics. First, I want to point out our opening. Our opening treats religion as an end in itself. If they can get more people into religion, that's usually good. And their unique impact is just like community. The thing is, we don't think that's actually the only exclusive thing to this debate, because without religion, you can still access other forms of community, such as your family, your friends, or your peer support group from your like school. They need to prove the uniqueness on why like religion is actually valued to society, and that's what I'll do. And OG, they also treat religion just like getting more exclusivity, getting more people religion as like a good thing. But I don't think religion is the end of itself. They need to prove why more people like going to religion and overall diluting the message of religion is able to compensate for that. They never do that. So we think even if you get more people religion, they don't prove a positive impact on why just more people into religion equals good. On to my case on why we get more religious integrity. Speaker, I think opening half are extremely focused on the extremely like marginal impacts, focused on the church itself, and focused on the people who always go to church. This is why we think like OG falls out of this debate, because religion's ultimate purpose and benefit isn't just simply to get more people in, but instead to actually church to be more like the church to actually have its value in itself and to like implement the morals and have the sense of community for people within religion. So overall, we think when they say if the church becomes more inclusive, more like marginalized communities can go in it, sure, that's true, but they don't prove why that's good. What do we think is the unique role of religion on the vast amount of people? And this is what's going to wash out everything. One, I think religion provides general moral guidance and support on like people's decision making, and it's like what's the correct thing to do, what's the morally correct thing, and what's right. We think religion offers a lot of guidance towards this because it's the virtue ethics that they posit onto people, like lying is wrong, you got to be like integrable, you got to be honorable, you got to be brave. These are the things that people overall guide their decision making on a day-to-day basis. And note, the reason this outweighs everyone in this round is because this doesn't only apply like people that actually go to church or apply to people within religions, because we think a lot of these like virtue ethics are also implemented in society as a whole. And the reason for this is that morality in most parts are completely arbitrary. We don't know why lying is bad. We don't know why donations are like overall good for people. But religion just tells us this because generally it has good outcomes and we just follow it. On their side of the house, these virtue ethics overall do not exist. These people can justify it for their own subjectivity and change these things, which we think is incredibly bad, and I'll do this later. But also, we believe this is because of these virtue ethics that are set as a standard for the morals in our society. Even if it's completely arbitrary, we think we follow it because most of the time it's the good thing. But second of all, we think religion exerts its influence on various people that are also outside of religion. Is this because there are many religious governments in the status quo heavily intertwined with religion? But second of all, even for more secular governments, we still think they have many religious incentives or like barriers within it. It's because the majority of their people are Christian, and therefore they're making laws that align with the virtue ethics and the morals that are implemented within these religions. So this is why we think are incredibly important. And instead, this debate isn't about whether like we get more like marginalized like LGBTQ people within this religion, because if they don't go into this religion, they could probably still find other communities and other guidance. But instead, these laws, and also importantly, that these virtue ethics aren't like specific enough, like saying things like, oh, gay people are good or bad. These aren't the virtue ethics we're talking about. It's about general moral codes that people should abide by. Shall I take a POI?
Anna and I both spend a lot of time on our speeches explaining why religion becomes more meaningful for people. Please engage.
Okay. The point is, it's not about religion, right? It's like these religions provide these ethics on what people should do. So people behave in a moral and rational way in society. This is what we're arguing about. I don't understand like how your POI even engages with the case at all. So overall, even if you don't buy that religions do exert its influence on people outside of religion, we can still win on the people that are actively within religion. And why do we think this is so incredibly good? We think these morals allow people to follow simple sets of rules, which have extremely low barrier to enter, and overall are generally good things that make people a lot better on our side house. So people know that killing is bad, people believe lying is wrong, and people won't cheat on their wives because they have these moral codes that are good. On their side, they can say that these like morals still exist. But the thing is, these morals and virtue ethics are going to be a lot more subjective on their side when people's own interpretations can go into it. People can subjectify like the 10 commandments, and overall, they can compensate for the metrics that they and themselves have. And overall, we think the metric that they're arguing for is utility and like utilitarianism, because humans are inherently selfish and operate on a utilitarian set of basis. So overall, we think it's very easy for them to justify these commandments or even just ignore them because of their own interpretation of God and do things that are morally wrong because there's not these sets of rules that are extremely binding onto people. On their side, you could probably justify, if I cheat on my wife, it'll provide me like 10% more benefits to my own happiness, so therefore I'll do it. We think these are the things that are extremely bad in society, and when we don't abide by these like actual virtue ethics, we think we lead to a much more dishonorable society where people are incredibly damaged.
Cool. I think that's before a fine speech. And Kelvin?
Yeah, I just want to check if I'm audible and visible.
Yep, you're good.
Okay, perfect. I will begin in. Just give me a second. I'm just setting up my timer. Perfect. POIs verbally, and yeah, I'll wait for pronunciation. I'll begin in 3, 2, 1. Go. There are 3 main assumptions that come from the whole of bench in this debate. First, this whole idea on community. Second, this whole idea on bias and bolstering this bias. And third, the extension we get from CO on virtue ethics. But I think we can just get that out by just showing that it's too radical. And by the amount of exposure that we have to religion in our childhood and the amount we grow with religion, the fact that religious doctrines exist, these basic values have been inherently exposed to us from society. A specific interpretation of God is not something that I can just use to blame onto, that because God, I have a different relation of God, I can just change my interpretation of God and I can say lying is good because God has a different relationship with me. You cannot do that because of the amount of exposure you have with religion, but I'll rebut that. But also on this community idea and this whole assumption on this community idea, I think this whole group idea is based on when the people tell you in a group and when people actually are part of a group and tell you something, you think it's okay. And our comparative is when God tells you something, we think you're more likely to believe it's okay. So even if we get the best comparative in a community, when people tell you something and you think that it's okay because you're in a community and a lot of people are also facing the same struggle, I think when God tells you, you're a bigger connection of God, so you're more likely to believe when God tells you that it's okay rather than people telling you it's okay. But also this whole idea on bias, I think it's still much worse on their side because we actually have a mechanism of removing this bias, right? Because you can still believe like the biases that you're struggling are just some struggles that exist, and because of God's relationship with you, God is actually putting you in those struggles. No, thank you right now. If someone is oppressing you with the bias, you can just think of it as a struggle and think that God actually supports you. You can believe that God even supports you when the people have this bias. So your relationship beats the struggle of this bias. Something we mentioned in our extension exclusively, and this is important because minorities won't face this bias on our side. And worst case, I think even if this biases exist on both sides, we actually give people a way to cope with this bias. They don't, they still let this bias exist. So proud to then propose in this debate. Three things, then again, rebuttal to OO, rebuttal to CEO, and then finally being against our opening. I think at the first point, I just want to start off with this whole bias idea. And I already gave you one rebuttal to it, which is the idea that this bias does not exist on our side. But I think this bias is more likely to then exist on their side. Why is this necessarily true? I think this is necessarily true because religion itself has a lot of stuff that inculcates this bias inherently, right? Women being oppressed, the caste system existing, all of this is part of religion, and religion itself promotes it. So on their side, this exists, right? On their side, religion is general, and God is in general, and God has some objective truth, and religion doctrines have some things that they propose on their own, which means that this oppression caste system still exists because people cannot deny this, and people have to follow this and buy into the religion, because if the religion tells them that women cannot do certain things, they'll have to do that. But now when they have their own relationship, even if the religion is oppressing women, telling them that they don't have to do this and they can only do this, because it's their own relationship existing, they can still tell themselves that it's okay, my religion is doing this, I'm facing the struggle of oppression from my religion, but because God believes differently in me, I can still cope up with this struggle that I'm facing in this relation, even if there is a bias that exists on their side, right? So it's much worse on their side and much better on our side. It's extremely important because we're much better for the most vulnerable, that are the minorities that exist, right? But secondly, on this whole idea that it's easier for people to leave religion, I don't think this generally works, because people have a lot of impact of religion on their lives. Like, I prove this to you that people have been following religion for a lot of time. They've been exposed to it from their cultural child. Again, the way society itself portrays religion, it's not easier for people to read religion anyways, right? But they give this whole idea then, secondly, on less consistency, read the Bible whenever you want, right? I think then, best case, it's still okay for a person to read the Bible less, or make it less inconsistent, as long as they're still part of the religion, right? And this is especially true for minorities, because poor people don't even have the money itself to put a lot into the religion, right? So they need to have some mechanism to be satisfied with whatever they're doing with the religion. If they have only less money and they're able to put that much, but their relationship with God is subjective on our side, they can still say that God will still be happy with whatever I do. I'm still satisfied with whatever I do for God, because I don't have to do a certain amount of stuff. Even if I'm less consistent, it's okay, because I have a different relationship with God. This means that even if you're less consistent, for the most important part of this debate, the minorities who don't even have the money to even support this consistency, they're still better off on our side, right? And this whole idea, and then less people going to church, doesn't work. Three reasons. First, I think most of the people who are heavily religious will still donate to church. But secondly, forcing people to go to church to donate means they're less likely to do it anyways on your side. But third, if people are actually loving religion, if people have their own interpretation of religion, and people can actually satisfy their religion on our side, they're much more likely to donate. This whole idea then on CO bringing this virtue ethic things doesn't work. I told you this inherently, because religion itself have doctrines that tell you what God generally is, and it's some general idea what ethics even look like. So you can't change the 10 commandments on your own. But secondly, social values exist on your side as well and on our side as well, which generally guide you towards the general good, right? Which generally guide you towards these virtue ethics. So you can't change the virtue ethics. No, thank you, right? But also now weighing against our opening, we win against our opening because we give it two most vulnerable minorities, which are better on our side. First, poor people with no money are still much more satisfied with our answer. And this is really important because they're the ones who are not able to support the idea, going to church, putting a lot of money, and doing a lot of things for God inherently, right? They're much more satisfied because God is satisfied with them, because it's their own interpretation. But secondly, minorities beat this struggle of bias on our side. They're the most vulnerable because now they can think that it's okay they're facing the struggle because God is still supporting them anyways, right? Even if I'm facing oppression, tomorrow maybe I might not, because God still supports me. They still have a coping mechanism, which is something that doesn't exist on their side, which is why bias is inherently better on our side. So on this vulnerable part, we already beat our opening because we talk about general impacts, which is not actually mechanized anyways, right? And it's exactly why for all of these reasons, you're supposed to vote for side closing government in this debate. Thank you so much.
All right, I think that's speaker for a fine speech, and I'll put.
Okay, I'll take POIs verbally, please. The problem with OO is that they assert better engagement without acknowledging what the actual reason for lack of engagement is. Like Pano, realistically, it's not less quote-unquote specialized connection with God, but less buy-in into the culture as a whole. And the problem with CO is that they are too extreme. Their assumption is that all religions are inherently corrupt and discriminatory, which is untrue if you look at religions such as Buddhism. Just because you grew up in this specific environment does not mean that you cannot value your self-interest above all else. That is what is most feasible and practical in this round we're so proud to oppose. I'm going to answer two questions in this speech. First, is this good for society? And second, is this good for the religion and its members as a whole? Let's first talk about societal impacts.
OJ's claim here is that religious organizations are involved in volunteer work, so by automatically increasing membership, you can benefit society more. But this relies on the fact that the religious institution has enough resources, which comes from its supporters donating things such as cash and money. Jerry tells you that there is a less demand for religious devotion because you can always justify your lack of loyalty with the level of connection you have with God. We told you that you actually give less moral guidance and virtuous education for those that need it, because religious members are able to find excuses for their lack of moral alignment by saying that, God is forgivable to them, that their God demands less devotions, etc. CJ's only response here is that, look, you grew up in this environment, so it's not like you're automatically going to think that lying is good. But number one, this is a contradiction. If you're already used to how people treat you within this community, you're not going to do things like fight against corruption and discrimination like they claim. But second, it is human nature to be self-interested when alternative controlling forces are not as strong. But lastly, even if people now grow up in this environment, what about future generations who will be involved in religion? This response is just not sufficient. You get more people committing bad actions in society. That was our impact. Note that there's a trade-off in this debate, and this is what OO doesn't prove. When people submit themselves into religion, they cannot seek moral codes elsewhere because there's this peer pressure. There's this stigma effect to be integrated into what the religion supports, and know that you cannot find alternative moral values from your parents because most of the time your family is religious in itself. Let's outweigh our opening then. Their impact is that religious individuals are less progressive because they're stuck in echo chambers. But that assumes that you cannot have any meaningful communication with other religious members. Jerry's argument takes prop at best. Even if there's a level of check and balance where people criticize you for your actions, the levers to opt out of punishment and scrutiny comes from you claiming that your God is forgiving all your sins. So our impact is accumulated in the long run because religion is heavily dependent on a community connection, which means that there's going to be a trend of more and more people committing bad actions for their personal interest. CO takes this clash because proposition's benefits to society is marginal, and I want to quickly note that this motion is not it's not an actor's motion, so CG just doesn't engage with the greater benefit, the most important impact. This is very important because CG can't just outweigh by saying that somehow minorities are better on their side, because what we engage in is the benefits to the whole society that we think is more crucial on a population standpoint. Second clash then, is this good for the religion and its members? CG gives us two things. First, that you get less discrimination in religion because you can uprise against your corrupt leader. I want to first note that this is incredibly uncharitable. Not all religions are coercive and corrupt. For example, Buddhism that emphasizes less on a leader, but rather individual development. Second, these people cannot have beliefs against their corrupt leader because oftentimes the leaders themselves claim that they have a closer connection to God that is enforced through signal effects. So if their mechanism for encouragement is connection to God in the first place, their impact is very easily flipped. But lastly, even if these people have more power on their side of the house, it's just unclear to me as to how this changes anything in religion. Power structures and discriminatory practices are historically passed down that cannot just be changed by you feeling a better connection with your God. Their second argument was that minorities in religion are able to find values in themselves. This is not true. Discriminatory beliefs don't just come from God. It mainly comes from people around you telling you that because you are a woman, you should accept your current status by abiding by the internal structure. This is not something that you can change just by having a more unique connection with God, because the people that you interact with every day still treat you the same. OG's argument here is that you help people with engagement, but the premise of this argument is just inherently wrong. I would argue that the level of support you obtain from a religion is not contingent on how God relates to his followers, but instead how much you buy into religion. So if I do not buy into religion that much to begin with, no matter how much God empathizes with me, I will not view this as a huge contributing benefit. So the people who don't engage still won't be engaged on their side. I want to know that you can still have some level of specialized interpretations on our side for prayers. So for example, if my grandma got cancer, I would relate to God by letting him help the cause that matter to me the most. What is most important is not how God, quote unquote, helps them, but rather what issues are forming that connection, because God is a relatively big figure. If opening opposition wants to focus on community, we say that we get better unity on our side, because Jerry tells us that you get more intense support when you have religious integrity. That is the point at which you have more respect for the religion when it is not built to accommodate for other individuals. The point of religion isn't to attract as many members as possible like a charity. Instead, is to increase loyalty and devotion for those that do buy into it. We're so proud to oppose.
Cool. I think that's speaker for a fine speech. And judges, do you want to do deliberation here or do you want to go on Discord?
I am fine with either. It does not matter to me.
Larry, can you pause the recording, please?
Yes.